That startup will fail. My father laughed, his voice echoing through the ballroom between bursts of Christmas music. 5 minutes later, my CFO walked in, and the room fell completely silent. In the grand ballroom of the Regent Hotel in Manhattan, gold ribbons curled around towering fir trees, and laughter chimed like the clinking of champagne flutes. It was the annual Carter family Christmas dinner, an event where appearances meant more than affection. My father, Charles Carter, founder of Carter Investments, held court at the center table like a monarch. My older brother Nathan sat at his right fielding compliments from a cluster of investors who hung on his every word. And me, I was the invisible daughter, the one who'd walked away from the family empire to play with technology. I used to dread these nights. The velvet tablecloths, the smell of cinnamon candles, the polished smiles pretending to be warmth. But this year was different. I wasn't the timid girl they once dismissed. I'd learned that silence can be sharper than any retort. And tonight, I was done hiding. The orchestra drifted into a soft rendition of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas as I entered. Heads turned, briefly scanning my simple navy dress. I felt their disappointment like a cool breeze. My mother Eleanor greeted me with that perfect blend of love and judgment. "Elena," she said, brushing my cheek with air instead of lips, "you look comfortable." Her tone made it sound like a sin. Across the table, Nathan grinned. "No date again this year, no," I replied. "My startup doesn't leave much time for distractions." "Startup," my father repeated, swirling his wine. "Still running that little project, are you?" "Still," I said calmly. He nodded, amused. "Well, persistence builds character, even if the venture doesn't." The table laughed. They always laughed. Father raised his glass. "To Nathan," he announced, "for keeping the Carter legacy alive in real business. And to our dear Elena, for proving that failure has its uses." The laughter returned louder this time. The investors chuckled politely. My mother lowered her eyes, pretending not to hear. The warmth in my chest froze solid. I smiled anyway. I used to crumble at moments like this. I used to excuse myself, lock the bathroom door, and breathe through the sting. But the woman sitting here tonight wasn't built to break. Nathan leaned over, smirking. "Maybe next year Dad will invest in your little app. If it's still around by then." I swirled my wine, watching the liquid catch the light. "Maybe," I said softly. "Though you might not be able to afford it." He laughed, not catching the warning. "We'll see." And then my phone vibrated. Once, then again. Then 3 times rapid fire like a heartbeat. I slipped it from my clutch under the table. The screen glowed with a push notification. Bloomberg breaking Valora Tech. CEO Elena Carter's net worth surpasses $10 billion following record valuation. I stared at the words, a tiny, quiet smile forming before I could stop it. At the other end of the table, one of Father's associates, a heavy-set man named Martin Hale, checked his own phone. His laughter stuttered. He froze, then slowly turned to look at me. Another guest leaned in to read over his shoulder. Whispers began to spill like champagne bubbling over the rim. Father frowned. "What's everyone talking about?" Martin cleared his throat. "Charles, I think you should see this." He passed his phone across the table. Father squinted at the headline. His wineglass paused halfway to his lips. "What kind of joke is this?" "No joke," I said quietly, setting down my glass. "Bloomberg tends to verify their sources." Nathan blinked. "Valora Tech," he stammered. That's yours." I met his gaze. "It's always been mine." The whispers grew louder. The chairs shifted. Someone murmured my name like they were testing how it felt on their tongue. Father's voice came out hoarse. "You told us it was a small startup. You told me it would fail," I replied evenly. "I just never corrected you." Then, like a cue from fate, the ballroom doors opened. A woman in a sharp charcoal suit strode in. Her heels clicked against the marble as she approached. "Excuse the interruption," she said, her tone crisp, composed. "Mrs. Carter Bloomberg just confirmed the valuation. Your net worth has officially passed $10 billion. Silence. pure dense, the air suddenly too expensive to breathe. My mother's fork slipped from her hand, the metallic clatter slicing through the stillness like a bell marking the end of an old world. Nathan's face drained of color. Father's hand trembled around his glass. I rose slowly, smoothing my dress. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I said, "and thank you for believing in me eventually." No one spoke. Not even the orchestra. Only the faint crackle of the fireplace filled the space where laughter used to be. I glanced at my CFO. "Let's go, Claire. We have a call with Singapore in 20 minutes. "Yes, ma'am." As I turned to leave, Father finally found his voice. "Elena, wait." I paused just long enough to look back at him. "You always said I needed to understand real business, Dad." My smile was calm, unyielding. Turns out I built it. And then I walked away, the echo of my heels cutting through the hush, like a final hammer striking the gavel to a story 5 years in the making. That night, I didn't just prove my father wrong. I shifted the axis of our family. But power once revealed always demands a reckoning. And my family wasn't done testing me yet. The next morning, Manhattan was still glittering with leftover holiday lights, but my phone had been glowing since dawn. 53 missed calls. 22 interview requests. Bloomberg's headline blazed across every business feed. "The Invisible Billionaire, How Elena Carter Outsmarted Wall Street." I stood by the window of my penthouse, coffee in hand, watching snow flurries swirl over the East River. Somewhere below, cameras were already gathering outside the building. Fame, I realized, arrived like winter. It looked beautiful from afar but felt colder up close. Claire, my CFO, sat at the dining table surrounded by tablets and printouts. "You broke the internet," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Every network wants you. CNN, CNBC, even the Times wants an exclusive." "Decline them all," I said. "For now." She raised an eyebrow. Still planning to stay in stealth mode after that ballroom scene, I turned from the window, meeting her amused gaze. The reveal wasn't planned. But maybe it was necessary. Claire smiled faintly. "You played it perfectly, boss. Controlled, elegant, the exact opposite of your father's reaction." I glanced at my silent phone again. He called 7 times. Your brother 3. Your mother once. She hung up before leaving a message. I set my cup down. "Let them wait." Claire hesitated. "You know this will go nuclear in the markets, right? The valuation spike, the media frenzy. It's all power, but it's volatile." "I've handled volatility before," I said quietly. "I grew up with it." At that, she nodded and returned to her screens. The intercom buzzed. My assistant's voice came through tight with nervous energy. "Ms. Carter, your father is downstairs. He says it's urgent." I took a slow breath. "Send him up." Claire looked at me, warning in her eyes. "You sure better to face an earthquake head-on," I replied. The elevator chimed moments later. When the doors opened, Charles Carter stepped out, as if the air itself resisted his presence. He still wore the same tailored overcoat from last night's party, but the confidence that usually clung to him like cologne was gone. "Elena," he began, voice low, almost uncertain. "Coffee?" I asked, motioning toward the table. He shook his head, scanning the panoramic view of the skyline. This is quite the place." "I built it," I said. "Like everything else you didn't approve of." He exhaled through his nose, jaw tightening. "I didn't come to fight. I came to understand." "Understand," I echoed. "You spent 5 years dismissing me. What changed Bloomberg?" His eyes darted away briefly, then came back to me. "Maybe I underestimated you." "No," I said. "You didn't underestimate me. You refused to see me." The words hung in the air like frost. He glanced at Claire, my CFO, who tactfully moved to the far side of the room. "Your CFO, yes. The same woman you once called the accountant who should be retired. She built my entire financial model." He grimaced, then turned back to me. "What exactly is Valora Tech?" "Elena, the papers make it sound like some kind of empire." I smiled faintly. "Empire is your word, not mine. Valora builds secure systems infrastructure, AI for logistics, cybersecurity frameworks for international networks, decentralized data routing. We've quietly powered half the Fortune 500 for years. He blinked. That's impossible. A company that size someone would have known. They did, I said. They just didn't know it was mine. Silence settled again. He ran a hand through his silver hair. You could have told us. And heard another lecture about how women don't last in tech? I asked softly. How should I have joined the family firm? No thank you. His voice softened. Elena, you have to understand. When you left, I thought you were throwing your future away. I said, your version of it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then my phone buzzed. Claire checked the screen. It's Bloomberg again. They're reporting a 15% surge in Valora's private market value. Also, your brother just gave a statement. My father's head snapped toward her. What statement? She handed me the tablet. The headline read, Nathan Carter comments on sister's company. I'm proud, but we'll see how sustainable it is. I felt the familiar chill creep up my spine. He just couldn't help himself. Father frowned. He's nervous. You embarrassed the family last night. I laughed a sharp sound in the quiet room. I embarrassed you. You humiliated me for years, and the moment the truth surfaces, I'm the problem, Elena. No. I cut him off. You raised me to fight for my place in the world. You just didn't expect I'd build a world of my own. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Claire's voice broke the silence. Ms. Carter. CNBC just pushed a new headline. The Carter dynasty's shaken daughter's tech empire overshadows Wall Street patriarch. You've officially become the story. My father's shoulders sagged. They're calling it a dynasty, I met his gaze. That word used to belong to you. He sighed deeply, eyes heavy with something between regret and pride. You've made your point. It wasn't a point, I said. It was a promise. To myself. He nodded slowly. Then let me make one for you. The family name may carry weight, but so does yours now. Be careful who tries to use it. It was the closest thing to respect I'd ever heard from him. As he turned to leave, he paused by the door. Your mother wanted to see you. She's processing all this. I'm sure she is, I murmured. When he was gone, Claire let out a breath she'd been holding. That went better than expected. Depends on the definition of better, I said. The snow outside thickened, muffling the city into a distant, monochromatic sound. My phone buzzed again, this time an unknown number. Claire frowned. Want me to screen it? No, I said, answering. Elena Carter. A familiar voice came through the line. Calm, deliberate, too composed to be casual. Ms. Carter, this is Thomas Vale from the SEC. We'd like to discuss Valora Tech's recent disclosures and your sudden valuation jump. My stomach tightened. I see, I said evenly. I'll have my legal team contact you. As I hung up, Claire was already pulling up documents. SEC, she said quietly. They move fast. Not fast enough, I murmured. She looked at me, eyes questioning. They're not the only ones watching, I said. And my family's not the only one who wants a piece of Valora. Outside, the snow kept falling soft, relentless, silent. Just like power when it starts to spread. The doorman called up before I could even finish reading the SEC's follow-up email. Ms. Carter, your mother is here. Of course she was. When Charles Carter couldn't fix something with authority, Eleanor Carter tried to smooth it over with etiquette. I told him last night she'd be processing. Apparently she'd processed fast. Send her up, I said, closing my laptop. Mom entered like she was arriving at a charity gala rather than her daughter's penthouse. Even at 9 a.m, she was immaculate cream wool coat, perfect hair, pearl earrings that had been passed down 3 generations. The same ones she'd worn to every family event where I was treated like a polite embarrassment. Elena, she said, with that breathy mix of surprise and reproach. You look tired. Running a global company tends to do that, I replied, motioning to the couch. Coffee? She ignored the offer and instead began scanning the apartment. My mind flashed back to the stifling silence of my childhood bedroom, where I read manuals instead of magazines. This is beautiful. Very sophisticated. I didn't realize your little company paid so well. My little company, Employs more people than Carter Investments, I said quietly. Her eyes flicked to mine. Your father told me about last night. You humiliated him. I almost laughed. Did he mention the part where he announced my failure to a room full of strangers before dessert? Elena, she sighed the way she used to when I refused to wear dresses as a child. You know your father. He's old-fashioned. He didn't mean harm. No, I said. He meant dominance. There's a difference. Her lips tightened. You always have to win, don't you? No, I said evenly. I just don't like losing to ignorance. She turned away, staring at the muted canvas of the city's hidden ambition. Do you know what it's been like today? Reporters outside our house, calls from every network. People asking if the story is true. If you really built whatever it is you've built. Your father hasn't left his study. Maybe he should start reading Bloomberg, I said. She turned sharply. Don't be cruel. I'm not, I said. I'm just tired of pretending we're a family. Something in her expression faltered like a porcelain doll briefly losing its footing. I did try, you know, when you were younger. But your father, he believed Nathan was the future. He still does. Because Nathan makes him feel powerful, I said softly. And I don't. The silence stretched. She finally looked at me, her eyes distant but softer than I remembered. You always reminded him too much of himself. That I didn't expect. Excuse me. The stubbornness, the ambition, the way you wouldn't settle for being told no. He saw himself in you, and he hated it. I wanted to be angry, but instead I felt something else, pity. Claire, my CFO, stepped quietly into the room holding a tablet. Sorry to interrupt, she said. Bloomberg wants a statement. CNBC too. And the Financial Times just published a feature, The Daughter Who Outsmarted Wall Street. Mother's eyes widened. They're calling you that. Apparently, I said. Claire continued. And one more thing, Nathan's firm just lost 10% of its market value. Investors are nervous after your reveal. Mom's face paled. That can't be true. It's already trending, Claire replied. I exhaled slowly. He tied his company too closely to Dad's name. The market assumes if Carter Investments is old money, then Valora Tech is the future. It's math, not malice. Mom sank into the couch, shaking her head. This is tearing us apart. No, Mom, I said. This is exposing what was already broken. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Claire silently slipped away, leaving the two of us alone with the sound of wind against the glass. Mom's voice came thinner, stripped of its usual rehearsed confidence. I don't know how to talk to you anymore. Start by talking to me like I'm not 12, I said gently. She smiled faintly, sad, resigned. You always wanted to be seen. I see you now. It should have meant something. It didn't. I checked my watch. I have a call in 10 minutes with our London division. You can stay if you want. She stood, smoothing her coat. No, I think I've overstayed my welcome. Mom, I said as she reached the door. She paused. I didn't build Valora to hurt anyone, but I won't apologize for being better than what they thought I could be. She nodded slowly. Just make sure you know the cost of being right. When she left, the apartment felt colder. Claire, my confidant, reappeared with 2 files. One good, one bad, she said. Start with the bad. Your brother just went on record with the Journal. He says Valora's valuation is inflated and that the SEC should investigate possible market manipulation. My jaw tightened. He's feeding them. On the bright side, she continued, Bloomberg wants you to live tomorrow morning. They're calling it the interview of the decade. I rubbed my temples. He's panicking. That's why he's leaking. He thinks he can control the narrative. Can he? Claire asked. I walked back to my desk and picked up the framed photo from years ago, the last Christmas we'd all spent together before I left home. Dad stiff in his tuxedo. Nathan beaming beside him. Me at the edge of the frame, half cropped out, holding a laptop no one had cared to notice. That picture was worth something to history. I turned to Claire. Schedule the interview. Prime time. And find out who leaked to the Journal. I want names. She nodded. You're really going to do it? I smiled, cold and certain. I've spent years building a ghost empire. Now it's time they see the person behind it. As she left, I heard the faint click of the apartment lock engaging, severing the last link to the old world. Some families pass down fortunes. Others pass down lessons. Mine taught me never to wait for permission to speak. Tomorrow the world would finally hear my voice. The makeup artist adjusted the mic clipped to my blazer hands, trembling slightly. "You're alive in 30 seconds, Ms. Carter." Behind the camera wall, the studio lights flared hot against my skin, blindingly white. Across from me sat Avery Collins, Bloomberg's star anchor, the woman known for slicing through CEOs like butter. "Relax," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just a friendly chat between two women who run the world. Only one of us needs ratings," I replied. Her assistant counted down 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked on. "Good morning, everyone," Avery began, her tone smooth, camera ready. "Today we have a woman the business world can't stop talking about, Elena Carter, founder and CEO of Valora Tech, the company recently valued at $10 billion. Elena, congratulations. How does it feel to go from invisible to billionaire overnight?" I smiled. "It took 5 years to become an overnight success." She leaned forward, hungry for a soundbite. "Your story has captivated people. You built Valora in secret under the radar of your powerful family. Why? Because building something extraordinary requires absolute strategic quiet. Noise attracts vultures." "Interesting," she said, flipping a page of her notes. "Speaking of vultures, your brother Nathan Carter told the Wall Street Journal that Valora's valuation is, quote, a bubble waiting to burst. Your response?" I kept my voice calm. "Nathan runs a traditional finance firm built in the past. Valora builds the future. Naturally, the past resists extinction." Avery raised an eyebrow. "So this is a rivalry. This is gravity," I said. "The world is shifting. Some will adapt. Some will fall." Her smile faltered just slightly. "You sound confident." "I'm prepared," I corrected. She glanced at the camera, lowering her voice a notch, her tone sharp now. "The SEC has reportedly contacted you regarding your valuation spike. Is Valora under investigation?" "They've reached out," I said, unblinking. "And we're cooperating fully. Every number in our books is verifiable. Every contract transparent. So you deny any wrongdoing?" "Completely," I said. "But if they'd like to investigate how women-owned tech firms are systematically undervalued until they succeed, I'll gladly assist." A murmur rippled through the control room. Avery blinked once, caught off guard, then recovered. "That's quite a statement. Truth tends to be." For a moment she didn't speak. Then she smiled, this time genuinely. "You're not what I expected. I never am." The interview wrapped in 20 minutes, but by the time I stepped outside the studio, my phone was already vibrating with the heat of the digital current. Twitter, CNBC, CNN. The digital current was unanimous. The past resists extinction. Claire, my confidant, met me at the curb, phone in hand. "You broke the algorithm," she said, grinning. "Your stock mentions are up 300%. Even the SEC released a statement saying there's no formal investigation at this time." "Good," I said, sliding into the car. "That buys us a week." "Before what?" "Before they start looking for something else to tear down." The car rolled through the gray Manhattan afternoon. Billboards flashed headlines I didn't have time to read. At every stoplight, I caught people glancing up from their phones, seeing my face on their screens. Power had a new look now. It wore navy instead of pearls. We pulled up outside Valora's New York headquarters, a sleek glass tower rising above Madison Avenue. I hadn't been photographed entering it before. Today, cameras were already waiting. As I stepped out, a journalist shouted, "Elena, any comment on your brother's losses this morning?" "His stock just fell another 8%. I paused, turning toward the lenses. "Market corrections are normal," I said. Confidence, however, is harder to regain. The shutters exploded in flashes. Inside, Claire caught up. "You're trending worldwide. Forbes wants a feature titled, 'The Shadow Queen of Tech.'" I almost laughed. They finally found a crown they could put on me. When I reached the top floor, my executive team was waiting, heads of development, operations, strategy. Their faces were bright, eager, and a little fearful. They'd all seen the interview. "Congratulations, Ms. Carter," my COO said. "We've just closed the Singapore contract. You'll be briefed this afternoon." "Excellent," I said. "Send the details to Claire, my CFO." He hesitated. "There's one more thing. Nathan's firm has started reaching out to our vendors. They're hinting that Valora's assets might not be stable long-term. It's borderline defamation." I set my bag down. Borderline doesn't scare me, but I won't let it slide. Claire folded her arms. "What do you want to do?" "Prepare a statement," I said. "Not a rebuttal, a message." She nodded. "Something for the press, for him." By evening, the networks were replaying my interview in loops, dissecting every glance, every word. The business world was split in two, those who admired me and those who wanted to watch me fall. At 10 that night, as I reviewed market data from London, an encrypted message appeared on my screen. "Unknown sender. He's talking to the regulators. Be ready." My pulse slowed. Claire appeared in the doorway with her tablet. "The statement's ready." I nodded. "Read it." She cleared her throat. "Valora Tech operates under complete transparency and innovation integrity. We don't build empires. We build systems the world depends on. Any attempt to destabilize that truth will only expose those who fear it." I smiled. "Perfect. Release it at midnight." Claire hesitated. "You really think your brother would risk everything to go after you?" "I don't think," I said. "I know," she frowned. "Then what's next?" I looked out at the skyline lights flickering like distant code. "Next, we show them that power forged in the quiet of code doesn't need to shout, it simply persists." The first snow of the evening drifted past the glass. Somewhere below, cameras still flashed, chasing an image they didn't understand yet. Let them chase. Because the storm was only beginning and I was done being anyone's quiet success. The letter arrived just after sunrise, hand-delivered by a courier in a black suit who moved with the stiff neutrality of a machine. The envelope was heavy, embossed with gold lettering. Inside, the words were simple and surgical: Carter Investments versus Valora Tech, Inc. I read it once, twice, then folded it neatly back into the envelope. Claire, my CFO, was standing at the window, already dressed for war. "They did it," she said. "Your father's firm just filed a federal lawsuit, alleging breach of fiduciary duty, corporate interference, and data misappropriation." I leaned against the edge of the table, the city still gray outside. "So this is how they want to play it. They're accusing you of using Carter Investments' proprietary data to build Valora," she continued. "They even claim you accessed old financial models from your internship there 10 years ago." I almost laughed. 10 years ago, I was writing code in a windowless basement while Nathan was giving tours to hedge fund clients. Claire didn't smile. "It doesn't matter. They're using it to question Valora's legitimacy." "They won't win," I said. "They don't need to. They just need to stain the name." A pause. Then quietly she added, "Nathan's name is on the filing." Of course it was. I walked to the window, not to look at the city, but just to turn my back to her for a second. The lawsuit didn't just claim assets. It claimed the last shred of goodwill I had reserved for the Carter name. It wasn't the theft of code that burned. It was the willing signature of my own brother turning our shared past into a weapon. By noon, the news was everywhere. Carter family at war. Billionaire daughter sued by her own father. Sibling rivalry goes federal. In the lobby downstairs, reporters were shouting questions as I walked through. "Ms. Carter, are you stealing from your father's company? Is this revenge for years of family favoritism? Did Valora Tech exist before Carter Investments' seed data?" I didn't answer. Silence, when wielded correctly, was its own kind of authority. Inside the car, Claire handed me a folder. "Our legal team's analysis. The suit's weak and it'll drag. They want discovery access to Valora's internal code." "That's not happening," I said. "If the court orders it—" The air thickened, a viscous silence, settling over the table, punctuated only by the hum of the cooling systems. "Then I'll bury them in filings until the next century." Claire studied me for a moment. This isn't about money anymore, is it? No, I said softly. This is about control. They couldn't own me, so now they'll try to dismantle me. When I reached Valora's top floor, my general counsel, a meticulous woman named June Patel, was waiting. She handed me a printed statement. Draft for media release. I scanned it. We categorically deny all allegations and remain focused on innovation and transparency. Too polite, I said, crossing out a line. Replace deny with condemn. And add a reminder that Valora has contributed over $1 billion in global infrastructure. Let them choke on relevance. June nodded. You know, in 20 years of law, I've never seen a family sue each other over intellectual property. You've never met mine, I said. By afternoon, we were on every channel again. Nathan appeared on CNBC, his tone calm and brotherly. I love my sister, he said, hands folded. But success doesn't excuse unethical behavior. If she's done nothing wrong, she'll have nothing to hide. The performance was perfect. Sympathetic. Respectable. Poison wrapped in velvet. I watched from my office, the volume muted. Claire stood behind me. He's setting you up to look defensive. I know. What are you going to do? Remind the world who taught him everything he knows. That evening, I called a press conference. The room was packed. Cameras, analysts, half of Wall Street waiting to see if I'd crack. I didn't. My father built an empire on investment, I began. I built one on innovation. The difference is simple. He bet on others. I built my own. Flashes erupted. The lawsuit filed today is not about justice, I continued. It's about control. I left a company that valued hierarchy over progress, legacy over evolution. Valora represents a new generation, transparent, global, and untethered to outdated power structures. A reporter shouted, "Are you saying your family's business is obsolete?" I looked directly into the camera. I'm saying evolution is never gentle. The next morning, Valora's stock stabilized. Investors called, relieved by my composure. Public opinion began to swing in my favor. But behind that calm front, the storm was building. Claire walked in with new intel. They're trying to subpoena internal communication logs. If they get those emails, they won't, I said sharply, because they'll have to go through international servers to get them, and that process will take months. And if they leak something anyway, I looked at her eyes cold. Then we leak back. Harder. That night I sat alone in my office, lights dimmed the city alive beyond the glass. A decade ago, I dreamed of this view, proof that I'd made it. Now it felt like a battlefield. My phone buzzed. A private message from an unknown sender. He's meeting with the SEC tomorrow. He's bringing your mother. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My mother. Claire, my confidant, found me minutes later, still holding the phone. What now? She asked quietly. Now, I said, my voice steady. Now they've made it personal again. I stood, sliding the lawsuit back into its envelope. If they want a war, I'll give them one. But they'd better remember I learned from the best. As she followed me out, Claire asked, "Where are we going?" "To rewrite the rules," I said. The elevator doors closed, reflecting our faces, mine, calm hers, pale. Outside, the city pulsed with headlines flashing like a heartbeat in glass and neon. Carter Vice S. Carter bloodline on trial. And beneath it, smaller, almost hidden Valora CEO, evolution is never gentle. I smiled at that one. They'd understand soon enough. Evolution wasn't gentle. It was inevitable. The air was still heavy with the quiet of a war room. My legal team sat around the conference table, eyes fixed on the statement draft projected across the glass wall. "Make it sharper," I said. "I'm not apologizing for my success." June adjusted her glasses. "Elena, we need to sound cooperative, not combative. The markets are still sensitive after your father's press tour." I turned toward her. "June, my father spent 40 years making sure his power was synonymous with the word control. The only thing that rattles him now is seeing it belong to someone else." Claire, my confidant, seated to my right, folded her arms. Then the statement needs to remind the world exactly who that someone else is. I nodded. Read it again. June cleared her throat. Valora Tech reaffirms its full compliance with all regulatory standards and its commitment to transparent innovation. Attempts to discredit our progress reflect resistance to inevitable transformation in global finance and technology. Add one more line, I said. Something personal. Something that lands. June hesitated. Like what? Like the truth, I said. Write this. We don't fear evolution. We define it. The room went still. Claire smiled slowly. Now that's the quote they'll print. By morning, the statement was everywhere. Every major outlet, every business podcast, every investor newsletter. I didn't read the headlines this time, I wrote them. Still, I knew Nathan wouldn't let it end there. At 11 a.m., my phone buzzed. Claire glanced at the screen. He's on CNBC. Live. I turned the monitor on. Nathan's face filled the screen, smooth, confident, rehearsed. I wish my sister the best, he said to the host. But when innovation becomes arrogance, when power lacks accountability, that's when the system needs correction. The host nodded sympathetically. So you believe Valora's success came at the cost of ethics? I believe unchecked ambition always does, he said, smiling, like the words didn't cut as deep as they did. I switched off the screen. June, I said quietly, schedule a call with the SEC. I'll handle it personally. Her eyes widened. That's risky. Let the lawyers... No, I said. If they want to question me, they'll get answers from the source. 3 hours later, I was seated in a private conference room camera on facing two government officials through a secure line. Ms. Carter, one began his tone formal, but not unfriendly. We appreciate your cooperation. We've received several complaints regarding the valuation process of Valora Tech. Can you explain the sudden growth over the past quarter? Certainly, I said evenly. Valora operates on a decentralized AI infrastructure. Our systems are self-scaling. Growth isn't sudden. It's algorithmic, predictable to anyone who understands technology instead of fearing it. The other official, a woman, leaned forward slightly. Your brother, Mr. Nathan Carter, claims your company leveraged private Carter Investments data during its early research. With respect, I said, my brother wouldn't know a data model from a dinner menu. Every system I built was coded from scratch on my own equipment years before Valora was even incorporated. There was a pause. The woman nodded, typing. Understood. We'll be reviewing the files your counsel sent over. Thank you for your time. Of course, I said. And gentlemen, if you need a clearer understanding of how Valora operates, I'd be happy to provide a demo. Though I imagine your systems are already running on our architecture. Their official composure briefly fractured before the call ended. When I turned back, Claire was standing in the doorway holding 2 glasses of water. You just challenged the SEC to an AI demo. They needed reminding, I said. Of what? That I'm not the one they should be afraid of. That evening, Valora's stock climbed again. Investors loved defiance, especially the kind wrapped in precision and calm. But peace never lasted long in this world. At 10 p.m., I received a call from an unlisted number. I answered without hesitation. Elena Carter. The voice was low, male, unfamiliar. You don't know me, but I thought you'd like to know something before it hits the press tomorrow. Who is this? Someone who worked for your father once, he said. Nathan's preparing a second filing. This time not against Valora, against you personally. My grip tightened around the phone. On what grounds insider trading, he said simply. They're claiming your investments through the Valora Fund were based on privileged government contracts. I said nothing for a long moment. And who's their witness? Someone inside your company, he replied. I think you already know who. The line went dead. Claire entered seconds later, seeing my face. What happened? They're escalating, I said. Nathan's trying to destroy me before the markets open. She cursed under her breath. We can stop this. Leak the truth before they can frame it. No, I said. We don't leak. We announce. I stood and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, but the city below shimmered under the storm's residue-wet streets, reflecting towers of light. We're going to hold a press conference, I said. Tomorrow morning. And this time, I won't defend myself. Claire frowned. Then what will you do? Redefine the battlefield. She exhaled a half laugh of disbelief. You really think you can win against your father's firm and the government at the same time? I turned to her, eyes steady. I don't fight for survival, Claire. I fight for dominance. The room went silent, every molecule of air yielding to my certainty. As the night deepened, the news cycle churned outside like an unending storm, hungry for a fracture, a collapse, a confession. But they wouldn't get that from me. Because the next morning, the world wouldn't just hear from a CEO under fire. They would hear from the woman who built an empire in the shadows and was finally ready to step into the light. The morning broke bright and cold, the kind of quiet that precedes a major move. The air in my penthouse was crisp, carrying no trace of the digital wars from the night before. I sipped my coffee, slowly reviewing the new logo for the foundation, an infinity loop, half steel, half light. I felt a quiet certainty settle over me, a state I hadn't known since I wrote my first line of code. The flashbulbs were already going off when I stepped onto the stage. The press conference had been scheduled for 9, but by 8:30 the ballroom was packed. Reporters, shoulder-to-shoulder cameras mounted like artillery. A forest of microphones waited at the podium, focused on me like 100 converging lasers. I didn't smile. I never did at moments like this. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice cutting clean through the noise. I'm aware of the accusations. Insider trading, data manipulation, and ethical misconduct. It's impressive, really. They managed to fit a decade of envy into 3 pages. The room rippled with nervous compliance. But before we continue, I said, resting both hands on the podium, let me tell you a story. Claire, my confidant, standing near the back, held her breath. She hated when I went off script. But this part wasn't written for the lawyers. It was for me. 10 years ago, I continued, I asked my father for $100,000 to start a data firm. He told me investing in me would be like setting money on fire. So I built it myself. With code I wrote at night with people who believed in something bigger than legacy. A reporter raised his hand. Ms. Carter, are you saying Carter Investments refused to support you? I'm saying they refused to believe in me, I replied. And that disbelief has now become their entire business strategy. Laughter, this time sharper, real. I pressed forward. Valora Tech has never hidden from scrutiny. Our financial records, our government contracts, every transaction, we've opened them all for audit. But here's something new. I gestured toward the side of the stage. A screen descended behind me, glowing with a single title, The Truth Fund. This, I said, is our answer to every accusation. Beginning today, Valora is creating a $10 billion fund dedicated to independent technological transparency, funded entirely from my personal holdings. The cameras exploded. This fund, I continued, will provide public access to ethical technology data, audit results, and infrastructure innovations that are usually buried under corporate secrecy. If they want the truth, we'll give it to them by force if necessary. A journalist shouted, "You're donating $10 billion. Not donating," I said. Investing, in truth. Because unlike those who sell it, I intend to own it. I stepped away from the podium, letting the announcement hang in the air like thunder. Claire caught my eye across the room, her face unreadable. When it ended, the press coverage was immediate. Carter defies family with billion-dollar transparency move. The Truth Fund shocks Wall Street, from scandal to strategy. For the first time in weeks, Valora's name wasn't followed by suspicion, it was followed by admiration. The aftermath was a vacuum, a deep, resonant stillness that seemed to swallow the click of the reporters' camera lenses. That night I sat in my office staring out over Manhattan. The city was glowing gold and glass, and I was its reflection, sharp-edged, untouchable. Claire, my confidant, came in quietly carrying 2 coffees. "You just changed the game," she said. "You turned an accusation into a moral movement." "I didn't change the game," I said softly. "I built a new one." She hesitated. "Nathan's not going to stop. You embarrassed him publicly. The Truth Fund made him look small." "He is small," I said. "That's why he makes noise." Still, she said carefully, The SEC will now take this as an opportunity to dig deeper. The fund's transparency will open every door. Good, I said. Let them see. I've got nothing to hide. She looked at me for a long moment. Are you sure about that? Her question hung in the air longer than the silence that followed. I turned back to the window. You think I'm hiding something? I think everyone with power hides something, she said quietly. Even you. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for the remote and turned on the evening news. My face filled the screen, projected confidence, immaculate calm. Then the segment cut to Nathan. He stood outside Carter Investments' Manhattan office, microphones swarming. $10 billion for transparency, he said, laughing. My sister's finally learning how to buy forgiveness. I suppose it's easier than earning it. The reporters chuckled. One asked, Do you plan to respond formally? Oh, we'll respond, Nathan said smoothly. After all, Carter Blood doesn't surrender that easily. I turned off the screen. He's not going to rest until I destroy him. Claire's voice was steady. Then destroy him first. The next morning, headlines shifted again, but this time not the way I'd hoped. An anonymous leak claimed the Truth Fund was nothing more than a tax shield designed to divert assets from investigation. Someone's feeding your father's firm from inside, Claire said grimly. Same source as before, maybe. Rage simmered low in my chest, but I didn't let it show. Then we'll trace it. June entered moments later, pale. Elena, you need to see this. She handed me a tablet. On it, a document signed and notarized, showing the formation of the Truth Fund. And under the list of original incorporators, one name stood out. Nathan Carter. My breath froze. How Claire's voice was sanded down to a whisper. He filed a shadow version before your announcement. He used a shell entity in Delaware to register the name hours earlier. Technically, you just announced his fund. The room felt smaller, the air sharper. June swallowed. He's going to claim you stole the idea. Again. I closed my eyes, letting the fury settle into something colder. He wants to make me look like a thief, I said. Then let's remind him what real ownership looks like. How Claire asked. I turned toward her, the city's lights cutting across my face like fire. By taking something he can't buy. His credibility. I straightened my blazer and walked toward the door. Schedule a private meeting with Bloomberg tomorrow morning. We're going to tell them the truth, my version of it. Claire frowned. And what's that version? I looked back. The one that survives. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored steel composed lethal inevitable. They'd taken my name, my idea, my story. But the one thing they couldn't take from me was the ending. That part, I'd write myself. Bloomberg's studio lights were colder than I remembered. The host smiled at me across the table, polished, careful, the kind of man who could make a corporate takeover sound like a casual dinner invitation. Ms. Carter, he began. Thank you for joining us on such short notice. My pleasure, I said, folding my hands neatly on the desk. Though I assume you didn't invite me here for holiday cheer? A faint chuckle rippled through the crew. He leaned forward slightly. Your brother Nathan Carter has made serious claims that the Truth Fund was in fact his idea registered before your announcement. How do you respond? I met his gaze, calm and direct. My brother has always been fascinated with taking what doesn't belong to him. This is no exception. But I'm not here to argue. I'm here to show you what legacy actually looks like. Behind us, the large display screen flickered to life, revealing a looping video of construction sites, server farms, and newly installed infrastructure nodes across Southeast Asia. 3 years ago, I continued Valorotech partnered with emerging markets to provide digital infrastructure, schools, hospitals, and renewable data grids. The Truth Fund will expand that work, independent of politics or family name. We've already committed $1 billion to projects in the Philippines and Kenya. Transparency isn't a slogan for me. It's a structure. The host nodded, slowly impressed, despite himself. So this isn't damage control. No, I said, leaning slightly closer. This is evolution. My family builds walls. I build systems that break them. The interview ended with applause from the control booth. By the time I stepped into the hallway, my phone was already vibrating with the heat of the digital current. Claire, my confidant, was waiting at the curb with the car running. "You just made the front page again," she said as I slid into the back seat. "They're calling it the legacy deal. Bloomberg's pushing your side hard. Even the markets are reacting. Valora's up 6% already." "Good," I said quietly. "But I'm not celebrating yet." "Because of Nathan?" she asked. "Because power doesn't end with a headline," I replied. "It ends with surrender. And Nathan's never learned how to bow." When we reached Valora Tower, June, our general counsel, was already waiting with new documents. "He's countering," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "Carter Investments just announced their own legacy initiative. They're offering matching infrastructure investments in direct competition with the Truth Fund. It's a PR war now." I flipped through the pages, scanning Nathan's smiling face in the press photo. Same suit, same confident smirk that our father used to wear. The caption beneath read, "Carter family restores integrity to global investment." Claire hissed under her breath. "He's baiting you." "No," I said, setting the folder down. "He's copying me." "That's worse." June adjusted her glasses. "He's also lobbying to block your expansion contracts with the EU. Claims Valora's algorithms give you unfair predictive advantage." "Unfair advantage," I repeated. "It's called innovation." Claire placed a tablet on the table showing livestock comparisons. "The public's divided. Some see you as visionary, others as ruthless. The Carter name is splitting markets in half." I stared at the numbers, red and green rising and falling like pulse lines. The empire I'd built wasn't just code and contracts anymore, it was narrative. Whoever owned the story owned the power. Then we changed the story. I said. How? Claire asked. By giving them something no one expects. That night I drafted a single-page proposal. No lawyers, no PR language. Just one headline: Carter Investments and Valora Tech enter negotiations for joint global fund. Claire's composure finally broke when I showed her. "You want to merge the two names, I want to control the outcome," I said. "If I can't bury my father's empire, I'll rewrite it from within." "Your father will never agree. He doesn't need to. He just needs to see the cameras." The next morning, I arrived at Carter Investments unannounced. The receptionists froze when I entered the marble lobby, the same building I'd once been too afraid to step into without permission. Now they called me Ms. Carter, like it was both a title and a warning. As I rode the elevator up, I recalled the last Christmas dinner where Nathan had whispered, "Maybe next year Dad will invest in your little app." The memory was a dull ache, not a sting. Nathan appeared in the hallway moments later, smiling that same poisonous smile. "Well, well, if it isn't my favorite disruptor. To what do we owe this? Royal visit. Put down your mask, Nathan," I said. "I'm not here to play." He gestured toward the boardroom. "Then let's talk." Inside the walls gleamed with portraits of our family's men, generations of Carters staring down from gilded frames. I could almost feel their judgment pressing through the paint. "I came with an offer," I said, sliding the folder across the table. He opened it, scanning quickly. "A merger," he laughed. "You can't be serious." "Completely," I said. "We combine the Carter legacy with Valora's future. Equal branding, shared governance. You get the credibility of innovation. I get the resources of heritage. Everyone wins." He leaned back, studying me. "You've lost your edge, Elena. This sounds like a peace treaty." "No," I said quietly. "It's a trap." He raised an eyebrow. "Because if you refuse," I continued, "you'll look like the man who couldn't forgive his own sister. And if you accept, I own you. Either way, I win." His smirk faltered for the first time. "You think you're untouchable?" "No," I said, rising. "I just stopped being afraid of you." The silence between us stretched. For a brief second, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who taught me to ride a bicycle in the Hamptons driveway and helped me install my first Linux kernel. A flicker of that old loyalty, not business but family, crossed my chest, sharp and unwelcome. Then the mask returned. "I'll discuss it with counsel," he said, standing. "Do that," I said, heading for the door. "But remember, legacy doesn't belong to the one who inherits it. It belongs to the one who rebuilt it. That night, as the city lights flickered beneath me from Valora Tower's rooftop, Claire, my confidant, joined me with a glass of wine. "You really think he'll accept?" she asked. "No," I said, watching the skyline shimmer. "But by pretending I want peace, I've given him something new to fear uncertainty." "Then what happens next?" she asked softly. I turned to her, the wind brushing against my hair. "Next, I burn down the myth of the Carter family. And when the ashes settle, Valora will be the only name left." Below us, the world kept moving, trading, whispering, watching. I caught my reflection in the dark window, my face sharp-edged, composed the author of my own rules. The game had changed again. And this time, I was the one who wrote the rules. The morning it happened, the city was too quiet. The kind of silence that meant something was breaking. Claire, my CFO, burst into my office, tablet in hand, eyes blazing. "You need to see this. Raventech's stock just collapsed 70% in under an hour." I looked up from the reports I'd been reviewing. "Raventech. Your brother's company," she said. "They over-leveraged on a semiconductor acquisition." The market just turned. Hard. I stood crossing to the window. Across Manhattan, financial screens bled out digitally in red. Raventech's ticker RVT was plunging in real time. "How bad?" "They're finished," she said quietly. "The European lenders pulled out this morning. Their supply chain is frozen. They're filing for Chapter 11 within the day." I didn't answer right away. The irony was almost poetic. Raventech had built its empire on arrogance, the same kind my father had taught Nathan to worship. "Diversify," I'd once told him. "Build infrastructure, not image." He'd laughed. Now the laughter was gone. The silence in the room was not empty, but filled with the faint, persistent thrum of our servers working the sound of Valora's engine. "Any word from Carter Investments?" I asked. "Not yet. But they've got to be panicking," Claire replied. "Half their portfolio's tied to Raventech. If it goes down, they go down too." I turned from the window. "Schedule a call with their legal team." She blinked. "You're reaching out?" "Yes," I said. "This isn't just collapse. It's an opportunity." Within hours, the call was arranged. On one end, Nathan's general counsel, flustered, defensive. On the other, June Patel, calm as glass, beside me. "We'd like to extend an acquisition offer," I said, voice steady. "Valora Tech is prepared to assume Raventech's remaining assets, including their proprietary chip design, in exchange for full debt absorption." "You can't be serious?" the lawyer stammered. "You'd be inheriting billions in liabilities." "I'll handle the liabilities," I said. "What I want is the infrastructure and the name." Nathan's voice erupted suddenly, unmuted and raw. "You think you can buy me out of my own company?" "No," I said. "I think you've already sold yourself out. I'm just collecting the receipts." He ended the call without another word. By evening, the news broke. Valora Tech to acquire Raventech assets in record collapse. Analysts called it a hostile takeover. They weren't wrong. That night, I walked through the trading floor, watching as the last numbers flickered into place. Valora's valuation had doubled in a single day. Every screen in the building reflected one truth: Raventech was gone, and I was its heir. Claire approached quietly. "They're saying Carter Investments lost half its liquidity. Your father's firm might not survive the quarter." I didn't move. "What about Nathan missing?" she said. "No appearances, no statements. His lawyers are silent too." "Good," I murmured. He finally learned when not to speak. June entered, then holding a sealed envelope. This came by courier. No return address. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, elegant, unmistakably, my father's. "Pride builds empires. Humility keeps them standing. You've forgotten the second half." No signature, no apology, just that. I folded it carefully and set it aside. "Prepare a press briefing," I said. "We're announcing the new integration." The next morning, I stood in front of the cameras again. This time the room was electric anticipation, curiosity, maybe a little fear. Today I began Valora Tech completes the acquisition of Raventech's global operations. This is not just a merger. It's a restructuring of the technological future. Flashes burst. Questions followed. Ms. Carter, are you concerned about antitrust scrutiny? On the contrary, I said. The only monopoly I believe in is excellence. Laughter. Applause. Does this mean the Carter family feud is over? Another reporter called out. I paused, letting the question linger. Feuds end when both sides stop fighting, I said. I stopped a long time ago. The cameras caught everything: my calm, my control, the faint glimmer of something almost human behind it. Afterward, I returned to my office where Claire was waiting. You did it, she said quietly. You buried Raventech. I sank into my chair. No. I buried my father's definition of success. She studied me for a long moment. What now? I turned to the panoramic window, the view of Manhattan sharp and impersonal. Now, I said, we rebuild what comes next. The city outside buzzed like a machine, alive, relentless. Later that night, as the lights of Manhattan bled into the horizon, I found myself staring at the old family crest that hung in the conference room, a relic we'd inherited when we bought out one of Carter Investments' subsidiaries. The engraved words glimmered faintly in the dim light, strength through unity. For the first time, I almost laughed. Unity has never been our strength. The division had forged us sharper than steel. Claire's tablet buzzed with a transaction alert, not a message. He's in London. Meeting with private equity, he's not done. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Of course, Nathan wasn't done. My father had raised us both to believe that victory was survival, not peace. But he'd made one fatal mistake. He'd taught me how to build. Nathan had only learned how to win. And winning was useless once the game was gone. Outside, lightning flashed across the skyline, illuminating the glass and steel of everything I'd built. The world was shifting again. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't revenge anymore. It was evolution. The invitation arrived on cream stationery embossed in gold, as if legacy could hide behind elegance. Carter Investments. Annual Winter Gala, London. I stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a summons. My father never invited, he commanded. Claire, my confidant, read over my shoulder. You can't possibly go. I have to, I said. He's never done anything without a reason. If he's calling a gala while his firm is bleeding, it means he thinks he has leverage again. She frowned. And if it's a trap, then I'll walk straight into it, I said. This time, I'm the one bringing the fire. London's sky was silver and sharp the night I arrived. The ballroom at the Corinthian was flooded with people, politicians, bankers, old money draped in new confidence. The air smelled of champagne and desperation. When I entered the crowd, parted slightly curiosity rippling through them. My name was still a headline, and the collapse of Raventech had made me something close to myth. My father stood near the grand staircase, flanked by Nathan and a cluster of investors. He looked older, his power wearing thin, his eyes sharper for it. Elena, he said as I approached. You came. Of course, I said. I wouldn't miss the eulogy. His smile didn't falter, but a hairline fracture crossed Nathan's composure. Still dramatic, my father said. Still cold. Still right, I said. What's this about? He gestured toward the group of men behind him. Our board. We're making a proposal. Another lawsuit, I asked. He ignored the jab. Carter Investments will be restructuring. We want Valora to oversee our transition into a digital infrastructure firm. Global partnership. I almost laughed. You want me to save you? I'm offering reconciliation, he said smoothly. The Carter legacy restored. Together. Nathan's jaw tightened. Don't do this, he muttered to our father. Quiet, my father snapped. You've done enough damage. The words cut deeper than I expected. For the first time, I saw Nathan flinch, not with anger, but with the cold realization of his own ruin. Why now, I asked. Why this? My father looked around the room, voice dropping low. Because legacy means nothing if it dies with me. You won, Elena. But power without lineage is temporary. Legacy isn't inherited, I said. It's rewritten. The old man's eyes narrowed. and rewriting it has cost you your soul. For a moment, silence stretched between us. The orchestra's strings hummed faintly in the distance, soft and cruel. You built your empire on debt, I said. Debt to men like these, to markets, to imagine. I built mine on something cleaner: data, precision, innovation. And manipulation, Nathan cut in. Don't forget that. I turned to him. Still bitter about losing your company. He stepped forward. You think you're untouchable, don't you? You think you can destroy everything and still stand there pretending you're the victim? I stopped pretending a long time ago. He smirked. Good. Then stop pretending you don't need us. I don't, I said. Really, he said. Because I have something you can't buy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a USB drive, holding it between his fingers like a dagger. Raventech's old server logs. Proof that Valora used our code in its early AI models. Proof that your empire started with stolen tech. The air around us seemed to still. My father looked triumphant. You see, the truth always returns. I met Nathan's eyes. You really think I didn't know you'd keep a copy? He blinked. What? I nodded to Claire, who'd been standing by the entrance. She lifted her phone, already recording. I knew you'd bring it tonight, I said. You've been emailing my head of security for weeks, pretending to negotiate. You thought you were feeding me information, but I was tracking you. Nathan froze. The data you're holding, I said softly, isn't evidence. It's bait. A replica I embedded with forensic markers. As of 5 minutes ago, the authorities have your IP transfer logs. You just confessed to corporate espionage on record. The blood drained from his face. You frame you, I finished. No, Nathan. I don't need to frame people who bury themselves. Gasps rippled through the nearby crowd. My father's composure cracked. You set your own brother up. No, I said. I gave him a choice. He took the wrong one. He stepped toward me, fury shaking his voice. You've destroyed everything this family built. I looked at him, calm and cold. No, father. I exposed it. Nathan dropped the USB drive. It hit the marble floor with a small, indifferent sound, a punctuation mark on his defeat. Security moved in. The press had already caught wind. Someone had tipped them off. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Ms. Carter. Did you set your brother up? Is this the end of the Carter dynasty? Did Valora engineer Raventech's collapse? I turned once toward the microphones, my voice steady. Legacy isn't about who falls. It's about who rebuilds. They kept shouting, but I was already walking away. Outside, the cold air hit like an absolution. London shone beneath the street lamps, a tapestry of wet asphalt and hard metallic light. Claire caught up to me, breathless. That was brutal. It was necessary. You just ruined your father and brother in front of half the financial world. No, I said quietly. They ruined themselves. I just turned on the lights. She hesitated. Do you feel anything? I looked up at the sky, the faint mist turning the city to glass. Relief, I said. And maybe a little regret. For what? For not doing it sooner. When I returned to the hotel, my phone was buzzing with headlines. Carter brothers implode at gala. Valora CEO exposes family scandal live. The end of the old guard. In the quiet of my suite, I poured a glass of wine and stood at the window watching the city burn gold below. A message arrived from an unknown number. They'll never forgive you. I typed back. They already didn't. The glass trembled slightly in my hand. For the first time in years, there was no one left to fight. I folded the final crumpled letter from my father, the one about pride and humility, and tucked it into my blazer pocket. I would carry it until the debt was fully paid. But as I stared at the skyline, the reflection of my empire, I understood something I hadn't before. Revenge wasn't victory. It was a revelation. And revelation had a cost. Tomorrow, I'd wake to a new world, one where the Carter name no longer defined me. But tonight, standing above the city that had once ignored me, I let the silence settle like the final precise application of a mathematical solution. For the first time, I didn't feel like the daughter of a dynasty. I felt like the woman who ended one. The world didn't end with the scandal, it simply adjusted its orbit around me. By the time the sun rose over Manhattan, my name was the digital currency carried by every headline and feed. Elena Carter topples the family empire. Valora Tech dominates the post-Carter economy. From heiress to architect. The boardroom felt different now. Quieter, heavier, almost reverent. The same people who'd once questioned my decisions now waited for me to speak with the careful attention of a hostile nation listening to terms of surrender. Status, I asked, without looking up from the reports. Claire, my confidant, stood near the window, tablet in hand. Carter Investments filed for voluntary liquidation, the UK. Regulators froze their remaining assets. Nathan's under investigation for data tampering and securities fraud. Your father hasn't made a public statement. And Valora. Our market cap passed $1.2 trillion this morning, she said. You're officially the wealthiest private CEO in the world. The words hung in the air, heavy and meaningless. I'd imagined this moment once victory, vindication, an empire built from ashes. I thought it would feel like freedom. Instead, it felt like silence. Schedule the board meeting for 9, I said finally. I want the new division structure ready. We're not just a tech company anymore. We're infrastructure. Claire nodded. And the Truth Fund. It stays, I said. Transparency will be our weapon now. She hesitated. Elena, after everything that's happened, your family, the investigations, maybe it's time to step back. Let someone else take the front line. I looked up at her. Step back. I spent 10 years clawing my way out of their shadow. If I stop now, I will become another name in the footnotes of their legacy. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. When the board was assembled, I stood at the head of the table. Raventech's assets are fully integrated. We now control 70% of global semiconductor production and over half the AI network patents. That makes Valora not just a company, it makes us the nervous system of the modern world. One of the directors leaned forward, his knuckles white on the table. That kind of dominance will draw attention, Elena. Antitrust regulators. They'll come, I interrupted, and they'll find nothing. Because unlike my predecessors, I build systems that self-regulate. We don't need to hide, we redefine compliance. A murmur of approval circled the room. But in the corner, Claire watched me closely. She didn't clap. She didn't smile. After the meeting, she followed me into my office. You're turning into him, she said quietly. I froze. Into who? Your father. The tone, the control, the obsession with dominance. I've seen this before. I laughed softly. You think building order out of chaos makes me like him? I think you've forgotten why you started, she said. You wanted freedom. You wanted to prove them wrong. But now it's about power. I sat on the corner of my desk facing Claire, the city's endless, hungry geometry, merely a backdrop to our conversation. Power is freedom. She didn't reply. Later that day, June came in with an envelope. It's from London, she said. From your father's lawyer. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter written in that same careful handwriting, each line deliberate, merciless. I taught you to fight. You learned too well. But legacy isn't measured in conquest. It's measured in what remains when the dust settles. One day you'll understand. No signature this time either. Just the weight of unfinished bloodlines. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside his last one. By nightfall, the news broke that Nathan had fled the country. His assets were frozen, his reputation destroyed. There was nothing left of the Carter dynasty but me. Claire came to find me on the rooftop. The world's yours now, she said. You did it. Manhattan stretched below an illuminated grid of consequence and creation. Did I asked. You wanted revenge. You got it. I shook my head. Revenge is temporary. Legacy is permanent. She studied me, then said softly, Then maybe it's time to build something worth leaving behind. We stood there in silence for a long time. The air was cool, the kind that carried the scent of change. The next morning, I called a global press conference. The entire world tuned in, governments, investors, ordinary people who'd watched the story unfold like a modern myth. I stepped onto the stage, no script in hand, just the truth. "Good morning," I began. "Over the past decade, we've watched power evolve from hands that inherited it to hands that created it. I've been called ruthless, ambitious, even dangerous. Maybe those things are true. But they were necessary. Because progress doesn't come from comfort. It comes from confrontation." The flashes were blinding, but I kept my voice calm. Today I'm announcing the Valora Foundation, a global initiative that will use our technology to rebuild digital infrastructure in developing nations, fully funded by our profits from the Raventech acquisition. For too long, innovation has been a privilege. It's time it became a right. The applause was thunderous. I didn't smile. When it ended, I walked off stage and into the quiet. Claire was waiting. "That was human," she said softly. "You almost sounded like the woman I met 5 years ago." "Almost?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Almost." That night I stood alone in my penthouse, looking out over the skyline. The glass reflected back a woman I barely recognized. Sharp lines, colder eyes, but steadier hands. My phone buzzed, another anonymous message. "He's gone." I didn't ask who they meant. I already knew. For a long time I just stood there staring at the city. My empire, my inheritance, my burden. In the silence my father's words echoed. "Legacy isn't measured in conquest, it's measured in what remains." I whispered to the glass. To the reflection to myself, "Then let this remain." The lights of Manhattan burned below like constellations of consequence. Somewhere out there, people were building futures on the systems I'd created. The Carter name was gone. But Elena Carter wasn't. And for the first time, that was enough. The morning after the world changed, the city was unnervingly still. The news anchors' voices bled softly from the massive screens across Times Square, reciting the same phrase on repeat. Valora Tech establishes the first autonomous global infrastructure network. I stood at the window of the new headquarters, the one built from Raventech's ashes, watching the sunrise crawl up the glass. The sky wasn't red or gold that morning. It was white, sterile, clean. The kind of light that erased everything before it. "Global markets opened up 5 points, Claire," my CFO said behind me, reading from her tablet. "Europe's infrastructure bonds jumped overnight. Singapore wants a direct partnership with the foundation. And the UN just called, 'You're being nominated for the Global Technology Leadership Council.'" I didn't turn. "Of course I am." She exhaled quietly. "You sound tired." "I'm not tired," I said. "I'm finished." She frowned. "Finished revenge is done, Claire. The old world's gone. Now we decide what replaces it." I turned toward her then, and for a moment I saw the woman who'd been beside me since the beginning, sharp, loyal. The only constant through all the shifting tides of power. She'd seen me lose everything, then build a world from first principles. "You're talking about more than Valora, aren't you?" she asked. I nodded. "We built a company that controls data systems, energy grids, and communication networks. But it's not enough to build, we have to govern. The Carter name fell because it clung to control. The new order has to balance it." She tilted her head. "And who gets to decide that balance?" For the first time in years, I smiled. "We do." By noon, the entire world was watching. The Valora Auditorium was filled with government delegates, investors, and reporters. A digital screen behind me displayed the Foundation's emblem, an infinity loop, half steel, half light. 10 years ago, I began. I was told that my startup would fail. I was told no one would invest in a woman who refused to follow her family's empire. And yet, here we stand, an empire built not from inheritance, but from imagination. Applause broke out, but I raised a hand silencing it. But this is not victory. It's a correction. For too long, technology has been a tool of division used to isolate, manipulate, and control. The new order I propose is simple transparency, accessibility, and equity in the digital age. I gestured toward the holographic map of the world behind me, glowing with Valora's global network. Starting today, Valora's core patents and AI infrastructure will be open source under the Truth Fund initiative. No walls, no borders. Innovation belongs to everyone. A stunned murmur filled the room. A journalist shouted, "You're giving away your technology. That's half your valuation, not giving away," I said. Setting free? Control without contribution isn't power, it's a digital feudalism. Claire stood off stage, her expression unreadable. She knew what this meant. The empire we'd built would lose billions overnight. But it would also become untouchable. No government could dismantle what everyone owned. By the time the press conference ended, the global markets had already reacted. Some analysts called it insanity. Others called it genius. But no one could deny what had just happened. The Carter Empire had fallen, and from its ruins something new had taken shape. That night I stood on the rooftop again. Manhattan stretched below an illuminated grid of consequence and creation. Claire joined me, wrapping her coat tighter against the wind. "You just gave away half the company," she said softly. "I gave the world something it couldn't steal," I replied. "You realize you've made yourself obsolete?" "Maybe," I said. "But I've also made myself immortal." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "You never stop, do you?" I looked out over the skyline. Stopping was never part of the plan. Silence stretched between us. Then she said, "He'd be proud, you know." "Who, your father?" I let the words settle like dust. "Maybe." Or maybe he'd say I burned down everything he built. "Sometimes burning it down is the only way to see what survives," she said. The wind picked up, scattering a few snowflakes across the rooftop. I watched them dissolve against the concrete, fragile and temporary. Everything was temporary power, legacy, names, but what we built through truth that would last. I turned back toward her. "Claire, I want you to take the foundation. Run it. You understand what it's meant to do." She blinked. "What about you?" "I'm stepping down as CEO," I said. "Effective tomorrow." Her mouth fell open. "Elena, I've spent my whole life proving myself to people who stopped mattering years ago. It's time to build something for myself." "And what is that?" she asked. I smiled faintly. Absolute velocity requires zero external noise. The next morning, the announcement went live. Elena Carter resigns as CEO of Valora Tech. The world erupted again. Stock prices wavered, governments scrambled, and journalists demanded explanations. But I said nothing. For the first time in a decade, I disappeared. Weeks later, I found myself in a small coastal town in Portugal, where no one cared who I was. The air smelled of salt and rain. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, vast and unclaimable. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the crumpled letter from my father. Without hesitation, I held the paper over the water and let the wind tear it from my fingers, watching the last words of the past vanish over the Atlantic. Sometimes I checked the news. Valora had stabilized. Claire had become the face of the foundation. The Truth Fund had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. Thousands of developers, innovators, and dreamers, rebuilding a digital future without borders. And somewhere quietly, Nathan's name surfaced again. A short article. Former CEO begins teaching at King's College. Focus on ethical frameworks. I didn't feel angry. Only peace. The world didn't need my war anymore. One evening, as the sun sank into the Atlantic, I opened my laptop and watched the Truth Fund's live map. Dots of light spread across the globe, marking new projects, new systems, new beginnings. A message appeared in the corner of the screen from Claire. "You were right. Legacy isn't inherited, it's shared." I typed back, "Legacy is the echo of what we choose to build. Keep building." Then I closed the laptop, stood, and walked toward the water. The tide was cold, but it felt real. Something the boardrooms and cameras had never been. The ocean roared, vast and alive, And for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about control or reputation or revenge. I was thinking about creation. The new order had begun. And this time, it didn't need my name.